And welcome to Whiskey Politics. Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor here at Whiskey Politics at America's Voice News, where you can also find me daily from 11 to 1 Pacific on America's Voice Live. Also, you can find Whiskey Politics here each and every Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific. And if you missed this live, you can subscribe to the Whiskey Politics YouTube channel and catch all of our episodes. I believe we're in episode 218 at this point. And you could also find our podcast, Whiskey Politics, on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and the Ricochet Audio Network. Just make sure you subscribe. Great to be back after our Thanksgiving break, and today we have two guests. In our next segment, we're going to have Dan Gabriel on his Oscar-nominated film Mosul, and he's here to discuss whether the ISIS Caliphate is reorganizing, especially in light of what just took place last weekend in Europe with the knife attacks. But today, we're going to start off with impeachment. The Democrats are moving forward. Facts, or the lack of them, be damned. And Nancy Pelosi seems hell-bent on brandishing this president with the scarlet letter I. To discuss this, Doug Wead is going to be joining us. He's a New York Times best-selling author and has been an advisor for two American presidents. Co-authored a book with one. He was a special assistant to President George H.W. Bush in the White House and has interviewed 6 presidents, 6 first ladies, 30 siblings and children of the American presidents. And after dozens of books and articles by anonymous sources, he is here to talk about his latest book. We're going to put this up here. Want to make sure that we have this. Donald Trump posted a great writer and historian Doug Wead has written a true, not fake news account of what is going on in Washington and the White House. His newest book, Inside Trump's White House, is an incredible description of a very exciting and successful time in our country's history. Buy it. The author, Doug Wead, is here to join us. Welcome, Doug. How are you, sir?
Hey, good. Good to be with you, Dave.
Thanks for joining us. I know you've been really busy with this new book, and congratulations on that tweet by President Donald Trump. I got to first ask you, you were in the White House, and unlike so many of these anonymous books that are out there where they're just using these unverified sources, you were actually speaking with the president and other folks in the White House themselves, correct?
Yes, and the family, they're great stories. I read all those great books like everyone else, and it was kind of nagging on me. Why are all these unnamed sources, anonymous sources? Doesn't anybody go on the record anymore? So I sat down with Ivanka Trump and I said, 100 years from now, when historians come back and look at this time, they're only going to consider primary sources. They'll blow away all the hearsay and anonymous sources. Somebody needs to interview the primary sources, and I'd like to write that book.
Yeah, I bet. Well, first of all, let's get into the story of the day. This impeachment train is barreling down the tracks here nonstop. You were writing about Trump's reaction to the Mueller investigation. What do you think's going on behind the scenes right now regarding this impeachment?
Well, of course, nobody wants to be impeached. He said that too, but I don't think it's working perfectly for the Democrats. It's a little bit odd. This morning they're comparing Donald Trump to King George, saying he's a monarch. Well, King George raised taxes. That was the whole issue. And the Democrats are already on record. They want to raise trillions of dollars in taxes. Donald Trump lowered taxes. King George wanted to regulate. The Stamp Act brought commerce to a standstill in the colonies. Donald Trump deregulated. And now they're talking about, the Constitution makes us do it. We have to do it. And this was a party just a month or two ago. One of their presidential candidates said the Constitution is dated. They want to add Supreme Court justices. They want to end the Electoral College. They want to end the Second Amendment. No free speech on their campuses in academia. So it's a makeover for the Democrats. We'll see if they pull it off.
You know, I've never seen the level of attacks and just outright hatred for any politician. And I've been around for a while. You go all the way back to Ronald Reagan. You were speaking with the family inside, you know, the inside, and it's a very intimate portrait of the Trump family bubble. How do the various family members deal on a day-to-day basis with the attacks that they're taking from all corners now?
Well, each of them have their own philosophy and how to deal with it. Ivanka says, I refuse to be bitter. I will not be bitter. And she says, I choose to be happy. She told me I can't function unless I'm happy. So I choose to be happy. So they deal with it, each one in their own way. They text each other every day, so they stay close. And the president cheers the first lady up. I've told this story. It's so funny to me. Sometimes at dinner time, he'll puff himself up with importance, and he'll say, Melania, honey, isn't this great, this adventure I'm taking you on? You wouldn't be first lady if it weren't for me. And she says, oh, yeah, thank you very much, because she's getting hit for no other reason than just pure jealousy.
A lot of time, the attacks on Trump use his own words that he puts out there. We saw it in the last few days in the impeachment hearings. They actually referred to his own statements. How do you, and I think you write about this in the book, how does his actions sometimes lead to misunderstandings with both the media and the public?
Yeah, he has this philosophy that many New York businessmen had, which says never complain, never explain. It's actually originated with Disraeli, and a lot of historians are fascinated by that because they compare Donald Trump to Andrew Jackson, and some compare him to Disraeli, who had no real partisan backing in England. He survived as prime minister because he was so good. The economy was so good. He was so good at what he did. And so it was Disraeli who said, never complain, never explain. But that's a strength for Donald Trump. It's also a weakness, because a lot of things are misunderstood, and he won't backtrack and explain what happened and when it happened, when he said it, and what it meant.
The personality is certainly different. The last president that you served as an advisor was George W. Bush, or was it George H.W. Bush? I just want to make sure.
I actually served for George W. Bush before he was president for several years, so I got to know him quite well and traveled with him. And
okay.
Yes, very
as governor?
different. All six presidents totally different, but all of them good listeners, including Donald Trump. That was a bit of a surprise to me.
You know, a lot of the issues that people have with President Trump isn't so much the policies, which I think we can all agree have been very successful, is his personality. Do you think that is an issue for him in the election, or is that something that a lot of people are just silent about and focused on things like, you know, prescription drug care, trade, and, you know, the 401ks going up?
You know, it may be, but I have to tell you, peace and prosperity, that's the gold standard. That's what you want. And I would hate for America to lose that, just to understand and appreciate what this means. I mean, we have right now 7 million unfilled jobs. That's the population of the state of Indiana. Everything Hubert Humphrey and LBJ and the social engineers of the 1960s ever dreamed of happening to the poorest of the poor and to disenfranchised minorities in this country. All of those dreams are coming true under Donald Trump. I'd hate for us to lose it.
Right. In our last minute here, Doug, and I greatly appreciate you taking the time, you talk about scoops and stories that are unreported. Can you share one with us?
There's so many. I have wonderful interviews with Jared Kushner, and they're just fascinating. The Trump children traveled all over the world in 2017 and 18. And I have the stories in the book. Heads of state would pull them aside, and they would say, please tell your father when you get home, tell him how sorry we are that he's going through this Russian collusion nonsense. And when I heard that, I thought, well, of course, I hadn't seen it through that perspective before. But if you're the prime minister of England or the president of France or some dictator in Iran, you want to know immediately, is this true or not? The economy of your country depends on it. Your security depends on it. Benjamin Netanyahu picked up the phone. He called the Mossad. And he said, I just saw this article in the New York Times. I want to know by 6 o'clock tonight. What in the heck does this mean? I've known the Trumps all my life.
Gotcha.
So the whole world knew the truth.
Right. Doug Wead, Inside Trump's White House. Fantastic book. Everybody check it out. We'll put a link up in all of our links as well here. Thank you for taking the time. We'll be back here with Dan Gabriel right after the break. And welcome back to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host. And if you haven't already done so, you can find our Facebook page, Whiskey Politics. Please give us a like. We're active on there. We've got lots of folks chatting and playing a lot of videos like this and others as well. This week, President Donald Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron, they sparred a little bit at the NATO conference over the fate of the European members of ISIS who continue to languish in prison camps in Syria. What to do with them? Meanwhile, we've got knife attacks happening all over Europe, as we just saw on the London Bridge last weekend. What's happening with ISIS? Is the Caliphate reemerging in some other form? Well, to talk about this and his incredible movie is CIA counterterrorism intelligence expert, CIA, Dan Gabriel. Dan is also director of this incredible movie, Mosul, who we're going to just play a quick clip for here for you. The director of that Academy Award-nominated film, Mosul, is the CIA counterterrorism officer, Dan Gabriel, and he joins us today. Dan, how are you, sir?
David, good evening. Thanks for having me tonight.
It's a pleasure having you. First of all, I want to get to the movie here in just a moment because that looks absolutely fascinating, and we want to talk about it. But it's been 5 years since the establishment of the Caliphate, and President Trump suggests that he's defeated the physical Caliphate, but we're seeing these different blips that are happening right now. Has it reconstituted elsewhere in another form?
Well, I think you hit it right on the head. So, if we think of ISIS as an organization that essentially held large parts of the Middle East, certainly Iraq and two-thirds of Syria at one point, they've lost their territorial hold, their ability to basically run a government in those parts of Iraq and Syria. But as an ideology, the threat is still very real. And this is where we can see it jumping borders like we saw in London, using very simple weapons to commit large amounts of violence.
Yeah, we saw 3 terror attacks over the weekend. I think the one in The Hague actually was not called a terror attack, but they're little small skirmishes all over the continent of Europe right now. Knife attacks seem to be the preferred method for these guys, such as the one that we saw on London Bridge. Are these attacks that should we expect more of them?
Well, I think it's probably what we need to expect. Yeah, it's the new way of life. And if you go back a couple of years to that winter when all of the refugees were initially flooding out of Syria and transiting into Europe, that problem that consumed all of Europe really for over a year and a half and really changed the fundamentals of what Europe was as a continent. There are about 10 to 15,000 ISIS fighters right now that are detained in refugee camps, both in Iraq and Syria as well as Turkey. And these people aren't going to stay there forever. So we're going to come to grips with this as a society, the West, the United States. We're going to have to decide where those people are going to be repatriated to, or are they going to be kept in Iraq and Syria at some cost. We heard President Trump and Macron kind of going back and forth at it, with President Trump saying, do you want some ISIS guys? I can get you some. So, yeah, this is going to be an issue that we're going to have to deal with as a society. When you think about all the controversy that surrounded Guantanamo and the detainees that we kept there, that was a very, very small number, less than the hundreds. We're talking in the tens of thousands here, and we really haven't discussed this as a society about what we plan to do. But these are people that are going to have to be somehow detained outside of perhaps judicial constraints that we may or may not have evidence, just like some of these people that ended up that we picked up on the battlefield in Afghanistan and held in Guantanamo.
As a CIA counterterrorism officer, a lot of folks, especially in the media, they're trying to attack this president, are saying that Trump essentially created a vacuum in Syria. You've got Turkey, you've got the Kurds, you've got Russia, you've got Syria, you've got Assad. You've got the folks that are essentially on our side, or maybe not our side, friends of my frenemies, I guess. But are you seeing that as a threat, especially in regards to al-Baghdadi was just killed? Is seven-headed Hydra, is that going to create more of a threat for us when it comes to Caliphate reorganizing here?
Right. Well, certainly President Trump didn't create the vacuum in Iraq or Syria. The defeat of ISIS did. And the question is, what do we do now? Do we leave the region entirely? Do we wash our hands of it? There was obviously confusion within our national security policy from what the president had come out and stated, and then what actually was executed or implemented as operational orders back in last month, essentially. Now, those troops, some of them have returned back to Syria to protect the oil resources that are in the country. But this is the question that we're going to have to wrestle with. I think if we looked at the film is it's a playbook for how we can operate in that part of the world without having a lot of U.S. troops on the ground. Of course, the U.S. troops were involved in Operation Inherent Resolve, which is what most of the film was about. But they're just off camera. Yeah. There's no American faces on this, and that was by design. That was the intention of the operation. And that's how we're going to have to fight future conflicts in that region, unless we want to get back to where we were in 2004, when we had 100,000 troops deployed.
Let's talk about the film, because you suggest that after the aftermath of Stalingrad, it's the largest siege of since Stalingrad, I should say. Sectarian conflict is now reemerging, and this plays like an action thriller in the Middle East. When you watch the trailer here. But first of all, let me first compliment you. You got an Academy Award nomination here as director. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, we're at the very beginning stages, so we qualified for an Oscar, and that's the first stage. And the next round is the short list, and then the next round is 5 films will be nominated for the best documentary feature. So we're a ways off, and to be clear, it's a long shot, but we're honored to be in contention, and there's some great competition and some great other films out there.
That's fantastic. That's really exciting. So this movie, tell us a little bit about it. It's from a tactical victory, met a stark realization that the war against ISIS may be over, but the seeds of another conflict have already been sown. Explain that.
Yeah, well, look, when we started filming in October 2016, we knew what the outcome would be. We knew that ISIS would be defeated. They were up against the Russians, the Syrians, the Iraqis, the Americans, NATO. So they were heavily outnumbered, and we knew what the outcome would be. The question was always, what happens after the battle, after the military victory? Do these groups within Iraqi society, do they all come back together, or do they go back to their fighting ways between Kurds and Christians, Yazidis, Sunnis, and Shia? And of course, that's what led to the vacuum that initially allowed ISIS to grow up in 2014 and 2015.
And as far as the current threat, we see, we just talked about al-Baghdadi was killed recently, the second and I guess the third in command, or the second was killed and the third is on the run. What does a reconstituted ISIS now look like with the different changing of caliphate under President Trump?
Yeah, Dave, you don't want to be the number 2 guy in ISIS. It's not a position you're going to have for a lot of people looking for you. But what does the caliphate look like? Look, it's going to be more about rebranding, maybe changing the logo or their color scheme than anything else, right? The ideology remains the same. This is the same ideology that we came across in 2004, 2005 when I was in Mosul. Then it was under the banner of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and then it became Zarqawi's group, and then eventually came into what we know as ISIS. So the ideology is still there. It's still the same. What changes is really their tactics and the strategy of how they want to implement that. And what we saw last weekend, as you pointed out in London, it's very easy to commit a knife attack, especially in a country that's been disarmed, as the UK has been. So, you're going to see probably less coordinated events and more what they call lone wolves, but we know they're not really lone wolves. But again, just think back to what it was like about 3 years ago when the trucks were driving down the street in France, running people over, and they were blowing up the the music theaters. So, it's a very dangerous time. We've had for a period of about 2 years now. ISIS you haven't heard much from them because they were in a fight for their life to hold their territory and the geography and the terrain. And now they're regrouping.
Let me ask you from a standpoint of just observing what we're seeing in Europe the past 20 years, the push towards multiculturalism and, in essence, tearing down the borders to North Africa and the Middle East. We're seeing that in Germany. We're seeing that in the city center of London. We're seeing it in Paris. How has that impacted Europe for the future?
Well, I mean, it's scary to think how it's impacted for the future. I mean, of course, Europe it was a Christian continent, and the dynamics of the continent have been completely overwhelmed and overrun by multiculturalism and what you've just referred to in immigration at large. Each of these countries, the UK, France, Germany, even the Nordic states, they're all dealing with this in their own way, bringing in their own cultures and how they deal with outsiders, and some to less success than others. But it's really different than how we think of it here in the U.S. We expect people to
and tell everybody where they can find the movie. They can watch it streaming. Everybody should watch it tonight. Where can they find it?
Absolutely. Mosul.film. It's if you go to the website, you'll be able to get to all the links where it's streaming at, including iTunes and Amazon and Google Play. So Mosul.film, you'll be able to find it there.
Fantastic. And everybody should definitely check it out. You're all over the place right now. Congratulations on the film. And we look forward to catching up with you down the road and getting some updates of what is going on the War of Terror. CIA Counterterrorism Officer Dan Gabriel. Check out his film, Mosul. And we'll have you back on again real soon, folks. And greatly appreciate it. Folks, don't go away, because I want to talk with you about what is going on right now with impeachment, because this is blowing up for the Democrats, and it is getting really, really interesting as we move forward. This week was a complete disaster, and we're going to talk about all of that, and Jonathan Turley, and much, much more after the break here at Whiskey Politics. And again, find us on YouTube. You can hit the subscribe button, and every week here at 4 p.m. at America's Voice News. We'll be right back after the break. And welcome back to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your purveyor at Whiskey Politics. Great to have you with us. And if you're not following us, well, we're all over the place. You can find me on Twitter. Please like our Facebook page, Whiskey Politics, as well as America's Voice News on Facebook. Great conversations with friends from all over the world at this point now are checking in on a daily basis. And we're updating not just with interviews and videos like this, but also great articles and comments about what is going on in the political world. And why do we call it Whiskey Politics? Well, because after a week like this, you really do need a drink. Holy cow, how crazy has this thing gotten? And when I say this thing, folks, I'm referring to impeachment. We all knew from the very beginning stages of this presidency that the Democrats will not take this presidency lying down, that they disagreed with your decision to vote for this president, that the great unwashed, you, ladies and gentlemen, well, you made a mistake. And they are going to rectify this mistake for you, and they will find any rhyme or reason to basically turn the election over of 2016. Well, normally, and you have a president that you don't like, such as many Republicans didn't like President Obama, you go to the polls every 4 years. That is technically what we do as a democracy. But the Democrats have decided, nope, you're just too stupid to vote, so we're going to do it for you, and we're going to overturn the election of a duly elected president. First, as we all know, it was the Mueller report. We're going to investigate Russian collusion. And lo and behold, we all know now know that there was no Russian collusion. And even with Mueller's fans of Hillary Clinton, they still couldn't find any proof of wrongdoing. Well, the Democrats didn't take that lying down, so they immediately pivoted. They went to the whistleblower, Eric Ciamella, and they decided that they were going to take the transcript from this Ukraine phone call with President Zelensky and decide to turn that into the reason that they are now going to get Trump. The problem is nothing illegal was done. The problem is, constitutionally, you have to have high crimes and misdemeanors. And no better person than to talk about this is a constitutional lawyer and professor such as Jonathan Turley. Well, he doesn't like President Trump. He didn't vote for President Trump. He voted for Hillary Clinton. He voted for Barack Obama. He's on CNN and MSNBC all the time. But the Republicans called him as a witness for the House Judiciary Committee that is just taken the impeachment inquiry from the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff. Now Jerry Nadler's running the show. And so when they started asking questions of Jonathan Turley, the media and the left did not like what they heard. Here is his first clip, essentially stating that this will be the first impeachment in history without evidence of a crime.
Now, there are three distinctions when you look at these, or three commonalities when you look at these past cases. All involved established crimes. This would be the first impeachment in history where there would be considerable debate and, in my view, not compelling evidence of the commission of a crime.
He's referring to Richard Nixon. Yeah, they broke into the DNC headquarters at the Watergate building. That was a crime. All right, he referred to President Bill Clinton, who committed perjury. That was a crime. Where's the crime for President Donald Trump? There is none. And that is why they got constitutional professors from, the elite universities of America to come and basically opine, yes, it was their opinion, on the reason that President Trump should be impeached. But Jonathan Turley turns it back on Congress, suggesting that it is not the abuse of power by President Donald Trump. It is actually the abuse of power by Congress trying to impeach this person, this president, for a crime that did not exist.
One more time. If you impeach a president, if you make a high crime and misdemeanor out of going to the courts, it is an abuse of power. It's your abuse of power. You're doing precisely what you're criticizing the president for doing. We have a third branch that deals with conflicts of the other two branches. And what comes out of there and what you do with it is the very definition of legitimacy.
Separation of powers, folks. This is a reality. You do not allow for the legislative branch to take basically their entire power that they have in the House and use that to overturn the election of the president, in effect impacting the executive branch. This is what the Democrats are doing. They have abused their power. They have lied to the American public. Adam Schiff started this whole thing with a lie. Remember him reading the quote-unquote transcript between President Trump and Zelensky? It sounded like a Martin Scorsese film. Speaking of Martin Scorsese, I'm going to talk about that next week, the Irishman. No bueno, guys. Too long. Anyway, I'll get to that next week. But it sounded like Adam Schiff's transcript sounded like a Scorsese film. It sounded like a screenplay. And he read that to the United States of America through the mainstream media, which has been carrying the water for the Democrats through this entire chapter. And what the Democrats have been doing by first starting this whole thing out in a star chamber, and it was a star chamber, where the Republicans were not allowed to call the witnesses that they want. The Republicans were not allowed to ask questions of certain witnesses. There were certain questions that were stopped halfway through. They were not allowed to ask those questions by Adam Schiff. And what they have done is they've basically railroaded impeachment in such a way in which it is now going to become exactly what they have done with other really heavy words. Impeachment is a heavy, heavy word. It is the overturning of a duly elected, democratically appointed president of the United States by the American people. And it has only happened 3 times in American history, in 45 presidents. They are doing to the word impeachment like they have done to the word racist. They've cheapened it. They've diminished it. And what they are going to be doing by bringing up these professors who have absolute 100% bias against this president, When you think of the elites, when you think of Harvard and Stanford and NYU and the best schools in America, and the reasons that so many people have a problem with the indoctrination centers of these universities spitting out these gender studies degrees into our corporations and media, is because of people like the Democrats brought to essentially patronize and lecture to the American people. Case in point, the Democrat star witness of the week was the Stanford law professor Pamela Karlan. By the way, if Hillary Clinton became president, she would have been a SCOTUS nominee. This is a lady that was telling us point blank that you're too stupid to understand the Constitution. She's going to lecture us out of the benevolence of her own heart. But who is she? This is a woman that has absolute vitriol and hatred for President Trump that rivals some of the most TDS-y, Trump derangement syndrome-y, Twitter users that we see out there on social media. This is a woman that wouldn't even walk on the same side of the street as the Trump International Hotel in downtown Washington, D.C. Here's a clip.
Yeah, so I was struck. I came in from the airport yesterday, and I got off the bus from Dulles down at L'Enfant Plaza, and I walked up to the hotel. And as I was walking past what used to be the old post office building and is now the Trump Hotel, which I had to cross the street, of course.
Are you staying there?
God, no. Never. But as I was walking past it, I noticed there's a...
Did you stay there? God, no. God, no. Never. I wouldn't associate myself and just stain my integrity by being associated with anything to do with this president. How dare you, lady? How dare you? How dare you patronize, diminish, and insult the 63 million Americans that voted for this president just because you don't like him? Just because you disagree with him, basically policy-wise, I'm sure. He's a conservative, and he's pushed more conservative policies and judicial nominees and tax reforms and regulatory reforms and doing all of the things that, as a conservative, you would only dream of. We crossed our fingers, hoping that President Trump would basically stand by some of the promises he made in his campaign. He's standing by them all. But Pamela Karlan disagrees with this president and disagrees with you, and she looks down at you, and she was screaming at you yesterday. I'm not going to play any more of her. I can't stand her voice. At the House Judiciary Committee, she was screaming at you because you're too stupid to know any better. After all, she's a Stanford law professor. Living in her bubble, her chamber, echo chamber of academics and politicians. For the past 30 years, she doesn't understand what it takes to own, run, and manage a business in the private sector. She doesn't understand the effort that it takes to wake up every single morning and take care of a family the way that most Americans do. This is the disdain that comes from the elite left, as we see in this country. And the Democrats, they just think you're too stupid to know otherwise. After the break, I'm going to continue talking a lot more about what just happened today as well with Nancy Pelosi. Did she have a stroke, by the way? That was really ugly. We'll talk more about this and more. And again, please take a moment. Find us on Facebook. Hit Whiskey Politics and give a like to our page. And keep up with more shows like this and others here at America's Voice News. We'll be right back after the break at Whiskey Politics. And welcome back to Whiskey Politics. If you're watching us live at America's Voice News, welcome. You can also find us on our live feed at Facebook at Whiskey Politics. And if you want to watch us at a later time, please subscribe to our channel on YouTube, Whiskey Politics, and catch all of our older episodes as well. What just happened today is incredible. And I'm sure if by now you haven't seen it, you will see it. It will be all over the mainstream media. And that is that Nancy Pelosi I don't know any other way than to say it, but she looked like she was having a stroke. Now, everybody knows who James Rosen is. He used to work as a reporter for Fox News. He had his phones tapped by the Obama administration. Yeah, it was that James Rosen. He now works with Sinclair News Network, and he asked Nancy Pelosi a question today that a lot of people have been asking of the Democrats, and that is basically, are you pushing impeachment right now because of your hatred of this president? And here's her response.
Do you hate the president, Madam Speaker? Because
I don't hate anybody.
Representative Collins,
the
reason I asked.
You don't hate anybody, not anybody in the world. So don't accuse me.
I did not accuse you.
You did.
I asked a question.
You did. And
Representative Collins yesterday suggested that the Democrats are doing this simply because they don't like the
I
guy.
have nothing to do with it. Let me just say this.
I think it's an important
I
point.
think the president is a coward when it comes to helping our kids who are afraid of gun violence. I think he is cruel when he doesn't deal with helping our dreamers, of which we're very proud. I think he's in denial about the climate crisis. However, that's about the election. This is about the election. Take it up in the election. This is about the Constitution of the United States and the facts that lead to the president's violation of his oath of office. And as a Catholic, I resent your using the word hate in a sentence that addresses me. I don't hate anyone. I was raised in a way that is a heart full of love, and always prayed for the president. And I still pray for the president. I pray for the president all the time. So don't mess with me when it comes to words like that.
Holy cow. Folks, she's the Speaker of the House of Representatives, not once, but twice. Look, I'm not somebody that will ever make fun of somebody because of their physical ailments. Whatever hers are, I don't know. She's got something going on with her mouth. We all know that. Maybe it's just her dentures are too big. But her arms, she looks like she's being hung by strings like a marionette. But I got no strings to hold me down. You remember Geppetto and Pinocchio? This is really scary that this woman is pushing this train. It is now going down the tracks so fast that even she can't stop it. This was a Pandora's box of poison, political poison, that she decided to open up when Adam Schiff came to her after Adam Schiff basically worked with Eric Ciaramella, the whistleblower, to come up with this concoction of an impeachable offense. And Nancy Pelosi took a look at the far left in her party. She took a look at the far left in her party. She realized that is where this party is moving to. The AOC +3, the squad, the extreme leftists. And she decided, you know what, tactically, she better go with them. Otherwise, she's not going to be Speaker of the House much, much longer. So this whole thing is absolutely about hatred. We know this. We know this because they are scared to death that this president is going to win re-election. Representative Al Green said that himself. It's been played over and over again that if we do not impeach this president, he will win re-election. Well, now it isn't even just about impeaching this president. It's about ongoing impeachment, continuing to try to find ways to impeachment. No limit to the number of times that Democrats will try to impeach this president. Al Green himself, again, said it. Here it is.
Considered. My hope is that we will expand this and take up additional issues. But I would also say this for your viewers, for edification purposes. A president can be impeached more than once. So we can do this. We can move forward with what we have on the table currently. We can take this before the Senate, and we can still investigate other issues. And when the president has committed additional offenses, and my suspicion is that he will, we can take those before the Senate. There is no limit on the number of times the Senate can vote to convict or not a president. No limit to the number of times the House can vote to impeach or not a president. So my belief is that the Speaker will probably say we're going to move forward with what we have now, but we're not going to end investigations, and that there may be possible opportunities to do other things at a later time.
He obviously didn't hear Jonathan Turley saying that it is your abuse of power, Congress. It is not the abuse of power of the President of the United States. It is your abuse of power, Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, and Gerald Nadler. It is your abuse of power because you do not like that you lost this election in 2016. These people are children. They need a time out. They are so emotionally just distraught with this, with the Trump presidency now, 3 years. They still haven't gotten over 2016. Representative Karen Bass said it herself best, that impeachment is important because everybody jokes about this president. We just don't like him. He's a laughingstock. Here she is.
What is fundamentally wrong here is that the president pressured another head of state for his personal gain. Yes, of course, we leverage our assistance on behalf of the United States, but we know that that is not what the president was after. It's not the way our foreign policy is conducted. And I really think, to see the three heads of state and NATO joke about the president, we do need to understand that everybody jokes about the president. If you go overseas, and I travel a lot, I meet with prime ministers and presidents, and everybody ridicules what is happening in our country right now, which is why I think impeachment is important, because it's important for us to demonstrate to the world we are a democracy. And when a democracy like the United States is in trouble, we have a vehicle to address the situation we're in, and it is called impeachment. It is important for us to demonstrate to the rest of the world that we can put this ship back in.
Everybody jokes about this president. Everybody across the world jokes about this president. If you took a look at that NATO meeting over the past couple of days, and unfortunately it got short shrift because of the impeachment hearings, but what President Trump has done is he has had the members of NATO who were not paying their fair share. I know liberals and Democrats and leftists love that term, fair share. The members of NATO were not paying their fair share. He's got them to chip in over $1 billion with a B dollars because he has come to the NATO and said to them, you guys, hey, we're not footing the bill here. And so NATO's members will look at President Trump, they listened to President Trump, and they agreed with President Trump, and then they started paying their own fair share. That's what took place at NATO this week. But the left don't want you to believe that. But the left, the MSNBCs, and I know that they're on the left as well, are starting to take notice that maybe, just maybe, this impeachment push may not end up so well, especially with so many people angry about it, that the individual numbers, the small donors, have spiked through the roof. Here's MSNBC.
Well, it's the scale of the fundraising that is really dramatic here. President Trump, instead of walking back from impeachment or trying to tamp it down, his campaign has really leaned into it. Mm-hmm. Within 28 minutes of Nancy Pelosi launching the impeachment inquiry, they had made huge Facebook ad purchases about impeachment, and within 3 days had brought in $15 million in fundraising of small dollar donations. And that is almost as much as Trump has spent the entire year on Facebook ads. Crazy. And that figure, that 16 million figure that Trump has spent on Facebook ads this year, dwarfs other candidates. And it's more than 3 times what the leading Democratic candidates have spent on Facebook. And so it's not new for candidates to take a controversy and try to fundraise off it and try to build their list. But what's different here?
That panel goes on. I could have played it longer, but we're coming to the end of our show here. MSNBC, the panel there are worried. They are concerned because this president is fighting back. He is not taking this lying down. And guess what? That 63 million number of Americans that voted for President Trump, many of them with their fingers crossed behind their backs when they voted for him, I was one of them, are going to be coming out in droves in November because of what the Democrats have done to this country. The abuse of power to try and overturn a Democratic election in this country. You don't do that in the United States. You do not try to attempt a coup of a president in a Democrat country. This is unconscionable what the Democrats have done. And I promise you right now, that there is a silent majority that is out there, many of you listening and watching, that are furious, and that will not go away anytime soon. We'll be back again next week here at Whiskey Politics at 4 p.m. Thursday Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern. Find me daily at America's Voice Live here, right here at America's Voice News from 11 to 1 Pacific Time. And don't forget to find Whiskey Politics on YouTube. Please hit subscribe, and on Facebook as well. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back again real soon. God bless and have a great weekend. Cheers.